is formed. Thank them for their continued diligence in sharing the learnings of their culture with current and planning for future generations. Note the attendance of all councillors and the attendance of the executive team, with an apology from the GM People and Strategy, who is delayed for a short time with matters beyond her control. Will be with us shortly. We move forward to prayers. I believe we have Pastor Josh with us via phone, and we'll hand over to you, Josh.
Oh, g'day to the council and to me. Just wanted to read from Psalm 57. I was over at Boona yesterday sharing in a service over there, a church service, and had the privilege of having them back together. And for once it was lovely to preach to people and not a camera. But they've done well and are quite diligent in their practices. But Psalm 57 was something that came to mind just in verse 1. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for my soul trusts in you, and in the shadow of your wings I will make my refuge until these calamities have passed by. And of course we know we're in an interesting sort of situation, and that's my prayer for you as councillors, but also for our area. So let me pray and commit your time to the Lord. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we pray for your protection against the calamities of our day, of our time. And Lord, we pray in particular, Lord, for Victoria and New South Wales, and Lord, for those in various levels of leadership and governance to make good and right decisions. Lord, we want to pray for Queensland, and in that same vein, and also for particularly our Scenic Rim. We ask you, Lord, that you be with each of the councillors, Lord, and that they too would know the shadow of your wings, which they would take and find refuge. And so, Lord, we pray that you would be merciful to us. And Lord, I also want to particularly just pray for the family from Rosevale, Lord, with that really tragic situation, the loss of their child. And Lord, essentially that same prayer, that you would be merciful to them, and Lord, that they would know the shadow of your wings in which they take refuge. So Lord, we just commit our day to you, and we want to particularly commit our councillors in their meeting right now, Lord, and we ask for your gracious hand be upon them in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Josh. It's always a privilege to have you share with us. And again, we always welcome you to continue to stay with us via the digital connectivity, and understand if you need to move on to other matters. Thank you again.
Yep. Thank you, and have a great day.
Okay. Councillors, we move to item 5 on our agenda, declarations of interest concerning matters before us today. Are there any declarations? Take that as a no. We have no announcements for today's meeting, and we have no deputations to the meeting today. We turn to item 9 on the agenda, the confirmation of the minutes. We have 2 meeting minutes to confirm, and that being firstly the special meeting of the 6th of July, the budget meeting, and we have a recommendation before us that those minutes be adopted. Seek a mover. Councillor Chalk, a seconder. Councillor Enright, any desire to speak? Anyone seeking leave to speak against the adoption of those minutes? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. We move to the second recommendation that pertains to the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 6th of July that are tabled for adoption. As per the recommendation, I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell, a seconder. Councillor West, wishing to speak. Councillor, anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. So that is, we now move to item 10. There is no business before the meeting today arising from those minutes. We move, therefore, to the item 11 and 11.1. Councillors, we have some officers with us. GM, would you please introduce the item?
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors and Executive. This morning, item 11.1 is about the Council grant and funding programs and the policy and procedure review that has been conducted with both. I have two officers here with me this morning, and this is a great step forward for us as a council where we have conducted a recent review that's considered all of the grants programs and looked at how we can streamline and simplify them. Councillors will recall that it's been our intention over the last 12 months, we've been working towards transitioning the current programs and the establishment into a new Smarty Grants online grant management platform, which is well progressed. And I'll hand to Kathy, our officer who's been leading this project, just ask if she has any comments that she wishes to make supplementary to the report.
Morning, everybody. Just to keep myself on topic, I've got a copy of the report in front of me, and as Deborah has just started the conversation, this is Council's grant and funding programs, and it's a hope that we'll streamline these funding programs in the 2021 financial year and beyond. And we're transitioning to Smarty Grants as part of that process, which is a online grants management platform developed by the Australian Institute of Grants Management. I'll step myself through the report quite quickly, and of course we're always available for questions. Implementing the Smarty Grants obviously will require a phased approach, so we can do this transition smoothly to this new grants platform. So basically, as part of the phased approach, and as we've discussed at previous workshops, it'll be the community grants, sport and active recreation, environmental, and the event support program were selected for the initial phase. And of course, as part of that, with any grants review, the policies and procedures were all reviewed. That's mandatory. And in preparation for Smarty Grants, it included a comprehensive review of the existing grants policy and the development of a new procedure using the new policy and procedure templates and framework. And it also gave us an opportunity to provide a much broader strategic statements in our grants policy, so it is a much more robust framework, we like to believe, plus new sections in those frameworks to address the statutory obligations now under human rights and the compliance monitoring and review. And the next part of the report, we also included some important changes to the respective grant programs. Of course, that made a lot of sense at the time, and quite frankly, delaying some of these changes would have been a missed opportunity for council. So the first one we reported on in our ordinary report is the community grants and the sport and active recreation grants. And based on our knowledge of these two programs and our experience, we conducted quite an extensive review, and the outcome of that was to combine the sport and active and the community into one, because we realised that they're basically the same cohort in the community, the not-for-profit sector, and they have very similar alignments in trying to achieve good outcomes for their community. And there's quite a number of items there we've referred to about consolidating and including two new streams, which effectively is the same amount of funding they've been able to apply for previously. We're just streamlining those grants programs. We touch on the environmental grants, and they've only done a minor review, so they've done some reviews over the years, and they still want to continue their program of preserving and improving environmental values, and it highlights the eligibility criteria they've pointed out in the report as well. Then we touched on, as part of environment, no immediate changes to the program were considered essential, and they just did a minor review, and that's based on their grants program obviously meeting a need at this point. Then the events support program is proposed to move to a regional events program. It operates in responsive rounds each financial year. That support program is seeking to be renamed to regional events to better reflect those regional objectives and aiming to achieve destination events for the region, as it's been talked about at previous workshops. And then I thought I might just mention The phased release of Smarty Grants, again, we need to do this in a phased approach just to make sure the community's comfortable. Community grants and regional events will be released, all being well, this month using the new Smarty Grants platform, and obviously been through that successful testing phase, and that was an important part of getting us to this point in the journey. The environmental grants are going to be released hopefully concurrently, and they're sticking with the existing program, and they'll transition to the Smarty Grants platform later in the year. And as we've pointed out in the report, the potential applicants are significantly different across these, so we believe with a really good marketing campaign that we can communicate that effectively across the broader community. And then jumping to, forgive me, so I'm just trying to keep myself on topic. From a Smarty Grants point of view, a lot of community groups are quite familiar with Smarty Grants. It really is the universal grants platform. A lot of state and federal governments are using them. Even the Gambling Community Benefit Fund has been used. So a lot of community groups are very familiar. And of course, we provide all of that support for the community and stepping them through that transition phase. We've also touched on, again, with this phased approach, we'd like to think that the Regional Arts Development Fund will transition into Smarty Grants at some stage as well. And it's got a very effective awards program. So we think things like the Australia Day Awards, the Business Excellence Awards, even the Be Healthy and Active will transition. And I just wanted to point out that in the final part of the report, an extensive consultation process was undertaken right across a number of portfolios and business units, and involved a lot of officer input, and of course working with the governance section. And as part of this collaborative approach, a number of our grant programs have been updated and will be integrated into Smarty Grants, and we see it as a business improvement outcome with the recent grants review, and the proposed amendments to the policy and the procedure are presented as part of the report. So happy to answer any questions. And so we just wanted to highlight, there's a media statement. The Minister released a statement just late last week, and they've obviously during the COVID phase, they've been, and we're still in it quite frankly, they've been looking at ways they can support our sporting clubs. So you should all have a copy in front of you that they are announcing their active Restart Infrastructure Fund. So this is, and very similar funding amounts to what Council's proposing, but this will be specifically for sporting clubs and for minor infrastructure improvements. So they've seen that based on feedback and talking to all the peak bodies. There's been a huge consultation process over the number of weeks up to this point, so hence why they've made that decision. Very short turnaround. So it's not meant to be major infrastructure, you can see by the amount. So clubs will be, and we know that's already been released to all of the sporting clubs through our local advisors. So, and the peak bodies have released that as well. And I'm happy to answer questions if I can. And yeah, that's.
So, Councillors, questions to the report?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Swanborough.
Kathy, I was just wondering on page 9 of the report, it says that previously, if an event, this is in relation to the regional events program, and it says previously, if an event applied for funding greater than 5,000, a report was presented to Council to consider the support on a case-by-case basis and to outline the return on investment for supporting a larger scale event. Does that mean that that won't occur now because it happened previously? So can people still apply for funding greater than 5,000 and be considered by Council?
I'll take that question, Councillor, as I know that Kathy, there's a different officer that looks after the regional events, Scott McDuff, I think councillors have met. So there's delegated authority to the General Manager for decisions of those grants because as they're like a rolling grants program, and that's up to a maximum of 5,000. So for any requests that are over and above that, they naturally come to Council to consider, and that is our intention to continue that at this point in time. That's because a lot of those are they're either pitching for grants, pitching for events. So there's a real-time decision that needs to be made in order to secure some of the events that we're trying to attract to the region. But whereby it's over $5,000, we think that council needs to have the full understanding of those requests and to look at the return on investment that regional event would bring to the destination. And it's our intention to continue bringing those forward to council.
Thank you.
Other questions, councillors? Councillor McConnell.
Thank you. Just got another one, just to stay on page 9, same paragraph. It says there that the event support program was undersubscribed in previous years due to a range of reasons. Could you elaborate on that?
It was probably more the previous year, I think, was mostly unsubscribed. There are a couple of reasons for that. Some of that was how the events program was being managed and delivered internally. There was also a range of events. I think there was a lot of confusion about, and that's probably to the point of why the officers are proposing to rename it. There's some confusion between a community event and a regional event. So community events generally are localised events that would apply to the community grants. There were a lot of applications that would come into the regional events, which is the need to rename this, because regional events are trying to get larger economic outcomes, so attracting visitors to the event that are outside of the region that would use accommodation and stay overnight. And so the return on investment is a totally different calculation to what might be a community event, where a community event is more focused on localised participation. So the review that has occurred across these two programs will help us take away some of that confusion. And so being undersubscribed was probably confusion about what could apply to the event and be eligible for it, to those funds, and some of how it was being managed and handled internally. So we've put some business improvement processes in place, and as a part of this review, I've capitalised on the opportunity to, to totally revamp and rename this.
Thank you. Just back to page 7, which is the community and sport and rec grants that have now been combined.
Yes.
The community grants were oversubscribed and the sport and rec was undersubscribed. If that is oversubscribed as a group, how will that be split between really the community grants and anything for sport and rec? Is there a criteria around that?
I think, and Kathy can add to this response if I don't cover this adequately, but I think some of the confusion still reigned previously, where a lot of the applications to the community grants were things that likely would have fitted in the sport and rec. And I think it's really why officers have reviewed this, because there's so much crossover between both the organisations that are in the community that are not-for-profit that are able to apply, and for the things that they're applying for the very reason that they've turned this into one bucket and one criteria and one grant, is because that confusion between the two things, which grant do I apply for? So the sport and rec have been undersubscribed, but a lot of the applications that were in the community grants could have fit the sport and rec. So the intention is now that it is one process, one fund, and the officer will work people through applying, whether it's for a sport and rec activity or a community-based activity.
Thank you. The other one is the phased release of sporty grants. It's you've got there released in late July 2020, which is about now.
Yes.
Have we got a status on our testing and release?
I haven't got an actual status unless Kathy can tell me, but I know that all of the branding and the setup of the system, the policy is integral to being able to release the Smarty grants. So Kathy, do you have a testing phase timeframe?
We've pretty much completed the testing phase program now, and in the lead up to this point we've done a lot of testing. So I suppose we wanted to highlight in the report that there's been a lot of testing in the background, but a lot of that's actually been completed, and as Deborah has mentioned, using and trying to implement the new sub-branding that goes with the grants. We've developed a new logo and making sure all of our grants look quite consistent. So we would like to think we're pretty confident with the testing phase, and the officers have actually been in the back end of Smarty grants and running scenario testing with grant programs, and they've actually picked up a few little bits and pieces and actually feel like we've got it to a really good point where it could pretty much hit the go button.
So have we used sporting groups to test as well, or have we just used
both sport and community? We've run quite a number of scenarios in the background in the test phase.
Have we used the community groups to do the testing, or has it just been council officers?
Oh no, just council officers internally.
Yeah. It's the same system, Councillor. It's still just testing whether or not you can still apply, fill in an application. That's what Kathy's referring to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Any further discussion to the report?
I probably have one other comment to make, Mayor and Councillors, and that is the commitment that the officers have to running anybody who's interested in applying the grants through training and sessions that would be run, I think maybe to be your point, Councillor McConnell. So there is many opportunities for anybody who's interested in applying to these grants to come to sessions and that can be run, and for one-on-one tutorials in order to assist people to use this system. But I think Kathy made the point earlier, many state and federal governments actually use Smarty grants now. It has been a system that has been in place for many, many years. So I think there will be quite a simple transition for organisations locally to start using this for the council grants.
Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'd just like to make comment about the importance of the community grants, the environmental grants, and through our regional events. Through the discussion this morning, we've spoken about return on investment, and I think as councillors we would understand that the contribution that council makes to our community groups, be that sporting, environmental or regional events, that return on investment is so much greater through the support of our council, providing funding to our fantastic community groups who achieve so much in their particular area. And I would have welcomed and understand the input of this review to streamline the process is very important, and I thank the staff for the work that they've done toward that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Any other comments or discussion to the item, councillors? If not, we have a recommendation in 4 parts before us. And just again, at the request of some in the digital gallery, I'd ask that we read that out for their benefit.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that Council acknowledge the findings of the recent review of the community grants and sport and active recreation grants, which highlighted the opportunity to combine the grants into one consolidated, more simplified community grants program. And 2, that Council acknowledge Council's various grant and funding programs will be transitioned and administered within the new Smarty Grants online grant management platform. And 3, that Council adopt the revised Council policy CC01.01CP Council grant and funding programs. And 4, that Council adopt the new Council procedure CC01.01CP Council grant and funding programs.
Councillor, I seek a mover. Councillor Swanborough, seconder. Councillor Enright, wishing to speak further, councillor?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, just for any listeners this morning, there's a lot of information around which is helpful to residents if they're wanting to get involved and start with Smarty grants. I think a lot of the larger councils are using this, and I personally have had a poke around and looked at a lot of online resources that can help people understand how to use this system, and it's all generic across the council. So yeah, I think it's a good move. It standardises a lot of this process for both council and the residents, and I think it'll have a lot of benefits going forward for everybody involved in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Not councillors. We have a motion. Put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers, for joining us and for your efforts in the preparation of this transition. We move to item 11.2, and we have officers from the planning group join us. GM, would you introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors and Executive. Item 11.2 is an MCU 19/121. It's a development permit for a material change of use kennel dog training facility that is based locally, and I've got both our planning manager and our principal specialist of development, assessment and engineering who have joined us today, and they can work us through the proposal for the subject site located at 40 to 50 Godsell Crescent in Tamborine.
Thank you and good morning. Council is in receipt of an impact assessable application seeking development approval for a material change of use to establish a kennel located at 40 to 50 Goodsell Crescent, Tamborine, which is in the rural zone and the rural residential precinct under the previous Bay Desert Shire planning scheme, which is now superseded. The kennel will be 14 metres from the owner's house and 80 metres to the closest adjoining residential dwelling to the east. It is noted that the adjoining resident has submitted a letter of no objection to the proposed development. The adjoining land to the west is a council-owned parkland known as Swan Park. Surrounding the subject site and along Goodsell Crescent are large type allotments with wide road frontages and deep building setbacks. Most lots are typically improved by single dwellings, and the surrounding areas mostly 2 hectare allotments. The managed dog training facility is primarily for behavioural and obedience training for 12 dogs. 4 of the 12 dogs will be the owner's personal pets. Operations will include day visits for training or daycare arrangements. The proposed kennel building will take the form of a corrugated iron shed, about 126 square metres in area. The dogs generally will stay for a 2 to 3 week period while undergoing training. Visitation to the property is by appointment only and will be managed with the appointments being staggered and in daylight hours only. Dogs will regularly be taken off-site for socialisation and distraction training in public places. It should be noted that while the applicant mentions the future option for group training sessions, this is not part of the application, and that will be subject to a future application should that progress. The applicant has supplied an acoustic report prepared by the company Acoustic Works. The acoustics report recommended 2 acoustic fences be constructed along the front and the eastern side of the kennels. Hedge planting is also proposed along the acoustic fences to soften the appearance of the solid timber fencing when viewed from the street. Additional planting is also proposed along the eastern lot boundary to obstruct the view of the kennel from that neighbouring property. During notification, there were a total of 47 submissions received. Of the submissions, 42 were properly made and 5 were not properly made. Furthermore, 1 submission objected to the proposal, while 46 submissions supported the proposal. Now, it should be noted that there were only 2 of the submissions came from the same street as the development, and 5 others were from the Tamborine district itself. In assessing submissions, the grounds of the submissions are considered, not necessarily the number of submissions received. The main grounds raised by the 1 submission objecting to the development related to business competition, which is not able to be assessed as a reasonable matter under the development when assessing development applications. The proposal itself complies with the requirements of the Scenic Rim planning scheme and does not raise any significant issues that cannot be addressed by reasonable relevant conditions. And the proposal is supported for approval, subject to 27 conditions listed in the report.
Councillors, questions? Councillor McConnell.
Just a quick one, thank you. The operating hours are from basically 7 a.m. to 6 p.m, not including weekends, when most of the people probably work during the week. So is there absolutely no room there for her to have, for the resident or the owner to have dogs dropped off or people come to training on the weekend? You've got to pull it forward.
Pull the button towards you.
Button on the top. Oh, it's not turned on.
Sorry, found it. There's no training activities on weekends. There'll be ability to drop off, pick up, and that sort of thing, but no training activities.
Okay, so any training outside of those operating hours?
No training outside those operating hours.
So in condition 4 talks 4C, boarding and training dog visitors, drop off and collection by appointment only and between the hours of 7 and 6 a.m. So it's not day specific.
So that's 7 a.m. and 6 p.m.
6 p.m.
Sorry, 6 p.m. Yes.
Further questions?
Yeah, I do have a few. I was just reading that. So are you saying they can drop off on weekends then?
That's correct. So the only restriction to weekdays is the daycare and the dog training visitors. So that's in relation to where people are coming to actually train with their dog is done during the weekday. But all other drop-off activities and the like is not specified to any particular days. So what that is more about is some of those activities are probably more likely to be done external of the kennels and more likely to maybe have an impact. And so that's why it's restricted on the weekend. It's not necessarily about the traffic. It's more about the activity on site, keeping it away from the weekends. But all other activities can operate 7 days a week.
But it's got day training dog visitors Monday to Friday.
Yeah, I think that's, Councillor, when it's people coming for training sessions, which are going to be held Monday to Friday.
But board and training dog visitors at the top. So you've got training dog visitors twice. What I'm trying to get at is, is there going to be a flow on weekends as well?
So Councillor, it may be the wording that comes after that bold heading in C has a different description to what's in D.
Correct.
So it talks about drop off or collection between those hours, as opposed to the activity of the training, which is what I interpret from the officer. And perhaps if that's unclear, is that the piece? I'm just trying to facilitate this a bit. The differentiation is that D talks about the actual on-site activity and C talks about bringing an animal or collecting an animal.
Correct.
And D talks about the activity on site being, so it's actually the on-site activity that is restricted to the weekdays. Is that the correct understanding?
That's what I'm trying to work out.
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, just to clarify, D is talking about daycare, so dogs being dropped off for the day, or day training, so people coming and their dog is trained for that day only. So if people are coming for a day training or a day care for their dog, that's weekdays. If it's the ongoing training or the ongoing boarding, that's 7 days a week.
Okay.
So it's the day training that's restricted on the weekends.
Okay, thank you. The next one is number 8 on page 25. The training area, does that have a lit training area or is that unlit at this stage?
No, there's no lit training area as far as I'm aware. This is a standard condition just for any light emissions.
Happy with that. Number, the electricity, number 25 on page 28. We've restricted them to generic supply. Is there a reason we, oh sorry, yeah, we've restricted them. The development must be connected to the electricity grid. Is there a reason that was put in and we didn't give them the option to solar power if they wanted to?
Again, it's a standard condition that the development has access to the grid. If they then want to do solar or whatever, that's their choice. But they have to have access to the grid. So we don't necessarily say you must use it or must use it solely. We would encourage people to use solar or the like if they wanted to, but at the end of the day, they must have access to the power grid, which is going to be potentially essential for some of the activities they're doing that will not be capable of being handled by solar alone.
Okay, thank you. Next one, I noted, as you said, that around about 40 of the submissions came from outside of the local area. I do remember sitting in on a meeting where there was a dog kennel over at Harrisville, I think it was, and dog kennels are one of those ones where it can work 24/7, where dogs barking the whole time, and we only get them to put a sign out the front of their property and put it in the paper. We don't actually canvass locals within probably within a kilometre radius that could be affected by the noise of the dogs. Is that something that was considered? The fact that so few people in Goodsell, Boomerang and Waldron Road, which is just over the river?
There is a risk in making assumptions as to why not submissions were received.
Yep.
You could just as easily make the assumption that submissions weren't received because people were not concerned, as opposed to whether they knew or not. Given that we did receive submissions from Goodsell, and I know it's a reasonably local community, I'm sure that there would have been a good network, people letting everyone else know. We can only assess the submissions as they've been received.
Okay. The next one is the building itself. Is that a closed building?
For the kennel itself?
Yeah.
Yes, it would be, yeah.
So I don't know if I'm going too deep into it, but I know that's probably the same sort of building that I have, and there doesn't seem to be any cooling on the building.
Well, it's not indicated in the application as such, but there's various ways they could do that. That wouldn't be a planning issue, so they probably, from a planning point of view, wouldn't need to supply that as part of the application. So where they insulate, air condition or the like, that would be just an operational matter.
So that's something we don't get concerned about.
Councillor, it may be something that the licence that they have to have for keeping of animals, that might stipulate
so
temperature conditions inside the building, yeah.
So it is or it isn't? Could we get clarification on that later then?
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you.
Just on that, if I could have a question on that point as well.
Sorry, just wait till, can we just wait till Councillor McConnell finishes? Councillor Swanborough, if you can just hold that.
So the other one is page 36. There's a diagram under Planning Regulation 217, and it has a orange outline. So you've got the bushfire potential impact buffer, and then you have the flood level. I'm just wondering what that other line was, the orange area.
That's the hatched area you're talking about?
Say again?
That's the hatched area? Sorry.
Yeah, see up on the board, see the orange area?
So that's the buffer area for the bushfire hazard overlay under the state mapping system. So you have the bushfire potential area,
yeah,
and then there's a buffer area of about 100 metres around that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in relation to the issue of noise again, there is no noise limit, measured in decibels or anything for this use, but quite often the nuisance comes about from intermittent barking at all hours of the day and night. If that was to occur in these situations and, within that 1 kilometre radius or whatever, the dogs intermittently barked at night and became a nuisance, is that a planning matter to be followed up, or is that a compliance matter to be followed up? And how would you deal with that situation in the event of a complaint?
That can be administered under either. Their kennel licence would have noise requirements as well. There's and also the planning conditions. So it would be assessed at the time as to which was the most appropriate piece of legislation to use. But I agree with dogs. There is that intermittent and short-term barking can be the nuisance factor, more so than prolonged noise. Bearing in mind that this is a training facility, an obedience facility, one would be hoping that that is not an issue.
Councillors, other questions? Yes, Councillor.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mark and Wayne, for this report. I just wanted to clarify the number of dogs. The report outlines a maximum of 12, and 4 of those are the owner's current pets. It then goes on to talk about the operation will include day visiting dogs for training and daycare arrangements. I just wanted to confirm that this number of dogs in the daycare is included in the 12 maximum dogs, please.
No, the 12 dogs relates to the kennel itself.
So the ones that come through the daycare is in addition to that 12?
No, daycare is kenneling. The day training, not necessarily so. So the kennel is for the kenneling operation, so it's the housing of the dogs. So whether that's short term or long term, the numbers apply. The 12 limitation.
So the ones that come for the training through the day that don't board, is that number included in the 12 or in addition to the 12?
It's not included in the 12, no.
Okay. Now, is there any restriction on the number of dogs that can come for the training through the day?
Councillor, the restriction or the conditions imposed state that there's 12 dogs on the property. 4 of those are the owners. 8 dogs is the limit for training for this facility.
So there will be no more, or the conditions will be that there'll be a maximum of 12 dogs on the property at all times.
That's correct, yes.
Other questions, councillors?
I do want to note the one submission against this proposal. There's nothing stopping this business using that other business to house dogs and then bring them over for training, is there? There's a kennel about, I think it was 2 k's away. So there's nothing to stop this business if they do max out to use the other kennel to board them and then bring them back to their property for training.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay, so that just goes against what we just said, that there's a maximum of 12 dogs on the property.
No, because they'd be in a different facility.
No, not at all. Sorry, how do you reach that conclusion, councillor?
Well, I thought you just said there's a maximum of 12 dogs on the property.
Yes.
Yep. And I just said, so there's nothing stopping this business using the other business to house some dogs and bring them back to that
right.
property
Yeah.
to one at a time to train, which I don't have a problem with myself. I just want to point out.
But why would they?
So I'm trying to
Whilst
get
they
out.
could- yeah, whilst
you
they
know,
could do it.
we know there's no group training at this stage, but we're saying there's only 12 dogs allowed on the property.
Yeah.
But if there's 12 there and then someone turns up for day training with 2 dogs, that makes 14.
No, sorry, I thought you were saying that they could assist the other business commercially, but no, if there's already 12 dogs there, they can't bring dogs in from the other facility. Just want to clarify that.
So technically, yes, they could use them, but they wouldn't have a need to do it.
Yeah. So we've restricted them to 12 only on the property until they maybe in the future get a group training permit, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Is
And
that right?
that group training would be looked at quite differently, which is why they've left it out of this application, because it's outdoor activity, potential for greater noise, less opportunity to restrict the noise. So it would be looked at quite differently to the kennels.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one more question. I noticed that 4 dogs are their own dogs. What is the general rules these days with the number of dogs that you can keep on a property that are your own? I thought it was less than 4.
I believe, it's not my area, but I believe 2 is the standard, but you can get a permit up to 4.
Councillor, it's probably not quite relevant to this. It's a good question, perhaps one for another day. It's not necessarily relevant to today's considerations. Any other questions? Any other discussion, councillors? So we go back to the recommendation, and for the benefits of those listening in the gallery, we won't burden you by reading all 27 conditions plus the advisory notes that run over an extensive number of pages. We will come back to read the core recommendation at the top of the page.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mayor. That council approve the development in respect of the following property. The real property description of lot 16 RP 854884. The address of the property being 40 to 50 Godsell Crescent, Tamborine. That 2, the currency period of approval. Development approval takes effect. Refer to section 85, lapsing of approval at the end of the development approval takes effect. At the currency period of the Planning Act 2016. That 3, the conditions of approval, the development permit is given for the material change of use, the kennel and dog training facility, subject to the following. And as Mayor said, there's 27 conditions that are outlined in the report. And the final part of the recommendation, there are some advisory notes that address licensing, development approval conditions to the land, when the approval takes effect, the lapsing, biosecurity and compliance with conditions. And 5, further approvals are required. There are other laws and requirements to consider for building works, plumbing, drainage, property access, location approval. And 6, that the submitters be advised of the following: that submitter advice approval council has considered all matters relevant to this application, including submission, and has resolved to approve the application subject to the listed conditions. And 7, administrative action, that decision notices be issued in accordance with section 63 of the Planning Act 2016 to the applicant and submitters.
Councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Seek a mover. Councillor McConnell, seconder. Councillor McGuinness, wishing to speak further. Councillor McConnell.
Yes, if I could. I think it's important that if you own a property, you have the ability to create a business. So I'm not against the business as such. I do believe we do have to look later at noise from a business and how it is approved. I'm hoping that this doesn't create an issue with the noise of dogs. They do travel a fair way at night around Tamborine. But I think it's a positive that these little businesses are made in the Tamborine area to bring investment to a small community. So I just want to be in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? If not, we put the motion as per the details of the recommendation. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers, for your assistance. We move now to item 11.3, which is under the Asset and Environmental Sustainability portfolio. GM, would you please introduce item 11.3?
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, executive staff and those listening online. Council has received advice from the Queensland Government endorsing Council's list of nominated projects under the COVID Works for Queensland funding program. Council's been successful in securing $1.73 million under this program. This item was previously endorsed by Council, recommended for endorsement to Council for inclusion to the state for their consideration. Most of the projects that were included on the program actually were in year 1 and 2 of the of our capital works program, as well as those projects that met the criteria within our operational budget. So I commit the report as listed.
Councillors, questions? Comments? Discussion to the report? I would like to make an opening comment. It is a great opportunity to have access to this funding. I am appreciative of it. Previously, the particular Works for Queensland funding has not been available to Council because of our location in southeast Queensland, and as part of the COVID response, we greatly appreciate that the Queensland Government has recognised that we share in the challenges with the rest of Queensland and have opened up the opportunity, at least on this occasion, for us to have access to the funding through that program and subject to the criteria of that program. I think it is also worth noting that an important part of the criteria for that program is for these works to be delivered generating local employment or giving security to local employment outside of Council's workforce. So actually using local trades, local businesses to deliver as a way to inject energy into the local economy. And that's a very strong foundation of this program, and one that I'm very supportive of, and delighted to have received the letter of affirmation of the programs that we've put forward for this round. Councillors, any other comments? Councillor McGuinness.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, endorse your comments there, and I think it's imperative that we take up these opportunities at the present time, and people probably get sick of me saying it. They're not going to be long forever, and if we can make use of them there at this present time, it's great for the community. So fully endorses the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to add discussion to this?
Just a quick one, Mayor. If we can also highlight the fact that we're going to use local businesses to complete most of these tasks, hopefully. If we could keep a track of how much of this grant actually goes to outside business compared to works being completed by Council, it'd be greatly appreciated.
For clarity, Councillor, this program, we are required for it to be delivered through external workforce, not by Council's workforce. That is a stipulation of the program, so your comment is somewhat superfluous to the process of the funding, if that makes sense.
I was more looking at what money is, so no funding from, no council wages or anything, or that will be put onto this?
GM, would you like to add a comment? My understanding's...
Yes, yes. My understanding of the funding guidelines are that any costs associated with this is borne by within council to be borne by council. So, as the report outlines, the majority of the projects were already included on our forward program, as well as the operational work. So there were allowances made for staff to administer or manage the delivery of these projects. So that's already covered within our existing budget. So that's the intention, is that what you see as money made available here is purely on contractors delivering the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swanborough, did you
I
want to...
was just going to comment that I think what Councillor McConnell might be getting at is if we have to use contractors, which it sounds like we will be, according to the guidelines, that those contractors are local residents if possible, local content if possible.
So, again, Councillor, I'll ask you to refer back, perhaps on another occasion we'll take you back. This is aimed specifically at making use of supporting local employment for local people and local businesses. As we have discussed a couple of times at workshops around this, that is the goal of this program, is to secure the employment of locals across our communities, particularly on this occasion where they have been impacted by the COVID pandemic and some of the loss of employment that's occurred. So whilst I'm not sure how else I can say it except that that is the specific requirement, and so the programs that are here are all capable of being delivered via local providers as part of the consideration that's gone into this works. I believe, GM, would that be a correct comment?
Yes. In saying that, some of the supply requirements within some of the elements of what's being delivered may not be capable or within the capacity of the local businesses. However, where possible, we certainly will be looking at sourcing these works through local businesses, which supports our goal as council in delivering wherever possible. Certainly, we still need to follow our purchasing requirements. However, those purchasing requirements do stipulate we consider locals above others where capacity is available.
And just a further clarification to that point, some of the examples here, we don't have any local manufacturers of RFID technologies, so that would have to be purchased, and then the installation can be dealt with locally. Similarly, we don't have any local producers of electrical equipment, so that would all have to be sourced at some point to come into the area. So that's the example of but the notion is very much about generating that local employment activity, or stabilising and securing and giving confidence to local employment. Thank you for those clarifications. Now, any further discussion? If not, I'll seek a mover. I'll ask for you to read the recommendation for us, please.
The Council acknowledge advice from the Minister for Local Government, Racing and Multicultural Affairs, Stirling Hinchcliffe MP, endorsing Council's nominated 2020-2021 COVID Works for Queensland projects.
Seek a mover. Councillor Enright, seconder Councillor McGuinness, wishing to speak further.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is an excellent opportunity for a win-win situation, certainly for our community in providing increases in facilities, but certainly for an employment opportunity and increasing the opportunities for funding into our local economy. So I certainly support this series of projects.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? No, we put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 11.4. Again, GM, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mayor. This item is dealing with Council's current waste collection contract, which expires on the 30th of June 2021. This report is around the fact that a new contract is required to commence from 1 July 2021. So tenders for the new contract are currently being sought through public advertisement. Following an assessment of the tender submissions, the matter is to be presented to Council for awarding of the contract. It is worth noting that the current tender takes into consideration Council's or aspects of Council's current draft waste strategy, as well as the state's acknowledgement of waste and where it's moving into the future. So there are certainly options within the tender documents to explore further opportunities in waste minimisation as one major aspect. The contract itself will be an 8-year with 2 1-year options, given that this will be one of the larger contracts that Council would enter into. It was thought prudent to advise you that it's currently out for advertising at the moment.
Can I just clarify one point you just said before we open for questions? You've said an 8-year plus 2 extensions. The report says a 7-year plus 3 extensions.
Sorry, my mistake, 7-year plus 3 extensions.
Thank you. Any questions to the report, councillors? Any discussion to the report? Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, just a couple. On page 57, paragraph 1, 2, 3, paragraph 4 at the bottom, it talks about the current delivery standards that constituents are familiar with will remain the same under the specified KPIs. Can we just get the top couple of KPIs that they're talking about?
Yes, I might turn to Kartik Venkataraman, who actually manages this aspect of delivery within Council, to provide some specifics on that.
Can you pull the button towards you and see if it works? No. Just a couple of technology challenges.
Good morning, councillors. Yes, as part of the tender, we have developed some KPIs, which is similar to the ones we had in the previous contract, and will be negotiated as we go through the tender process in terms of awarding the contract.
Could you give just a couple of examples? Councillor McConnell, what would be a typical KPI that would relate to what community sees, I think is the question, Councillor? Yeah,
in terms of KPIs, we're looking at missed bin services, also the customer service side of things. We have KPIs around the waste education, and also looking at the on-call service side of things, and the truck specifications, and the cleanliness and around the street litter bins, and the frequency of it. So there are certain KPIs set around collection, and also the frequency of collection and the cleansing of the street public place bins. So, for example.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion on this item, councillors? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. I must say that I've been impressed with what I've seen in the layout so far of the tender, in the providing the flexibility to cater for what is a changing space in the area of waste. And as we know, things change fairly quickly, and I see that there's so much detail in this tender document that provides scope for change as we go. It is the single most significant tender that Council has in our organisation, and it is important that it is delivered well, but also provides opportunity for changes, as I believe it does in this document. So well done to the staff who brought this to this stage.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to mention, in terms of advertising, we've also posted this on LinkedIn and Facebook. So there's a broader reach, in the community in terms of the tender. And
Councillor Swanborough, you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question about the rise and fall provisions in the tender. I'm just wondering if you could just outline how those are going to be determined and what are the major factors that will determine, what the ratepayers can expect each year as far as, potential operating increases in cost, whether it be related to, is it a CPI figure or is it another type of index, or are there other factors that will be brought to bear in determining what the likely increase in fees might be for the ratepayers going forward in this contract?
Thank you, Councillor Swanborough. The rise and fall formula has been slightly tweaked, but predominantly is based on CPI. But there's also other components and factors incorporated, such as labour, the commodity values, and depreciation as well. But overall, the formula remains the same. So basically, it's on CPI basis. And in terms of fees and charges, I don't believe there's going to be a significant increase for the ratepayers or the community. And it is all, and I think in terms of what we charge the community and what we are getting in terms of services, there's not going to be much of a difference in variance across the life of the contract.
Would it be a fair comment in the context of this tender to recognise this is fundamentally a logistics contract, because council operates its own waste management in terms of the landfill, the consolidation of waste, the management of waste, and this is really the logistics components that gather that from various locations and consolidate it.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. This is purely a waste collection contract. And there's a separate contract for the recycling side of things with Wizzy at the moment. And this is basically purely going to be curbside collection and some looking at different variables and potential expansion in terms of collection and how we can better service the community in terms of maximizing resource recovery. So that's the objective of this contract.
It's also worth noting, councillors, that the flexibilities that have already been alluded to and that Councillor Enright alluded to as well really are necessary because of the rapidly changing landscape, and certainly southeast Queensland with the direction from the state government currently very clear around thinking about moving towards a zero waste or zero avoidable waste to landfill environment will inevitably make changes to the types of materials that are having to be dealt with, but also the way they have to be dealt with, and potentially needing to have the capacity to separate waste at source is all being built into the thoughts of what may be required in the future as this through the life of this contract when it is finally let. So it's quite an exciting time in life to be thinking about those levels of change. Councillor McConnell, were you looking to add a comment? No. Any other commentary or discussion on this item, councillors? Not, I'll ask the GM to read the recommendation for the benefit of the gallery.
Thank you, Mayor. The Council acknowledged the current invitation of tenders for Council waste collection contract, with the matter to be presented to Council at a future date for the awarding of the contract due to commence on and from 1 July 2021.
Seeker mover, Councillor Swanborough, seconded Councillor McGuinness. Wishing to speak further, Councillor? Anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion as per the recommendation. Those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's carried unanimously. We now move to council sustainability, item 11.5, and the monthly financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to the listeners out there. Yes, this report enclosed provides for the June 2020 financial report. A disclaimer is that whilst these reports have been generated with the end of year financing, there may be some slight adjustments due to accruals and other things, but we'll provide that to council once the financial statements have been generated, that are to be handed to the auditors for auditing. I take the report as read, and I'll just provide a brief synopsis of some of the key items and open the floor later. As indicated in the report, the net operating surplus is actually 1.192 ahead of what we originally anticipated at the revised budget. There was a revised budget of operating deficits of about 914,000. The result at the moment will appear that there's a operating surplus of 1.192 million. The reasons for that are outlined in the report, mainly due to receipt of some grants and also some under expenditure in some operating costs due to a number of reasons. We will provide a comprehensive detailing of the year-end analysis when we bring that to council, whether at the time when the time comes for consideration of some carry forwards and other things. On the capital expenditure side, again, this is just a financial summary. There will be a presentation to council of the wash up of the capital expenditure program and obviously what's to be carried forward into 2020-21 financial year. But from a financial sort of perspective, capital expenditure associated with capital is about 26.7 million behind budget. And the three major areas there that contribute to that, VATV, the 12.61 million, some of the works, roads and other things of 9.8 million, and fleet of 2.6 as part of the replacement. There's some deviation in terms of the other revenue when it comes to fees and charges. You can see there we're about 700,000 behind budget associated with the revenue of the fees and charges. So out of the budget of 5 million, there's about 4.2 million dollars has been realised. You'll note in 2021 budget that's been revised to as best we can to around 4.8 million dollars. And the other summary I'd like to provide is just on the last page of the actual attachment, which is page 71. Just a brief summary around the outstanding debtors. We can see in our debtors we've got about 3.9 million dollars outstanding total. Of that 3.9 million, 3.5 relates to council-related costs, and 383,000 relates to charges that we levy on behalf of rural fire and also the emergency services levy. So to normalise that, based on the 2021 budget, we'd see the 3.5 million dollars in outstanding rates. It's around 6.21% of a total budgeted revenue, gross revenue for rates and charges for the 2021 budget. Various years are detailed in there. That gives you a percentage of those. And the last point that I'd like to just bring is just around the expenditure by location. I guess whilst the local expenditure is showing roughly 29%, the figures that we provided as part of the budget deliberations took into account the June quarter, And the June quarter actually showed the local expenditure from 1 April to 30th of June, around 6.094 million out of a total 15.5 million, or 39% of total expenditure for that June quarter. If we look at the start of the COVID period from 1 March, when some of those initiatives were applied, that till 30th of June, that amount was 36%, or 7.428 million. The year-on account is from 1 July to 30th of June 2020. That sees 18.9 million out of the total $66.7 million in expenditure being spent locally, or around 28% for the year on end. That is, and I've just sort of provided a breakdown of some previous years. 1 July 2016 to 17, it was around 25%, or 12.5 million out of $49.3 million expenditure. 2017 to 2018, that was around 36%, 21.8 million out of 61 million. And 18-19, 1 July 2018 to 30th June 2019, it was around a 27%, or 25.283 million out of 92.294 million. That particular year, 94 million being spent, there was some considerable flood damage as well as some bridge works spent. But so this year, yeah, we're doing pretty good on average. We're continuing to hopefully set the bar higher and higher by trying to explore and seek local expenditure where we can. It's the summary I had, Mr. Mayor, unless there was
questions, councillors, to the report.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just have a question. On page 6, just in relation to the capital program, I understand, you know, some of the reasons perhaps for the big underspend in a lot of areas, but the one I'm just making inquiries about today is the fleet. The original budget was $4 million for fleet, then it was revised up to $6 million. We've spent 3.3 million, but we've got commitments which bring it back spot on to budget again at the end of the year. And I was just wondering, was this an extraordinary year for purchase of fleet? $6 million on fleet seems a very big number to me, and I'm just wondering if there was any extraordinary items in there that I'm not aware of.
As far as extraordinary items, I can explain that the increase was to do with timing of carryover from the previous year. Probably the only extraordinary item I could actually add to that would be the purchase of a drot for landfill operations, which is a considerable investment within our landfill operations. A drot. We are looking at opportunities to purchase a compactor as well, which certainly is a large investment also. We've certainly hiring an item of plant like that is certainly given the hours that are utilised, it's best that we own something like that for the operations at our landfill. Again, we are experiencing some delays in receival of plant at this stage due to a number of factors across the board.
Can I just ask, supplementary to Councillor Swamber's question, am I to understand, just for clarity, the revised budget, the revised budget for fleet was revised because of timing of a capital purchase from last year that was brought forward because, again, of the availability wasn't able to be executed in the previous financial year, and therefore the budget and the expense was carried forward into this financial year. That's what happened with that line item?
That's correct.
So what you see as the adjustment, Councillor, is the adjustment between original budget and revised budget is where the carry forwards of matters that couldn't be completed for various reasons, particularly from a capital point of view. That's what saw that increase. It was a matter that wasn't completed last year, carried forward. And it is this constant challenge about my observation to that, what has been, it's about both the availability of the plant, but also the right timing in the utilisation of life cycle to get maximum life out of the asset in that year. Was that a correct?
Yes, and it'd be worth noting that, as Councillor Swanborough pointed out, we have commitments that match very similar to the dollar value that's listed there, but we're still waiting. We've got orders at the moment for approximately $2.6 million that we're committed to the supply of those items. We haven't yet realised the actual expenditure until they arrive on site in a suitable manner.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillors, other questions?
Also, mate, just a slight supplementary to that as well. Council did review, as part of the refresh and refocus, our purchasing arrangements, which undertook the exercise of issuing a purchasing required pre-qualified suppliers to incorporate our local suppliers who were previously not on that contract. So there was a delay at time once that was established, and that's now seen the majority of white fleet, or where we can purchase locally.
Thank you. Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to make a comment about the hardship applications, and although it's really beneficial that we do offer those to the community, it's just interesting that we haven't had maybe as many as we may have thought, and they're certainly being actioned very quickly, which is very positive.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's interesting. Whilst we have opened those opportunities, certainly we expanded the normal hardship provisions last year, as you'll recall, from both drought and bushfire circumstance, and have extended that further through the COVID period. There has been still a very modest take-up, which perhaps speaks strongly to the resilience of the community, but also we should ensure our comms for that is ongoing. Councillors, I would just like to just revisit the capital and just some further clarification in the capital program, in the works line in particular. There are a number of capital programs that we have consciously delayed seeking grant funding, and were consciously delayed last year seeking grant funding, which it'd be nice to just clarify, and perhaps not for today if we don't have the right detail with us, but certainly as we come to the reconciliation of the year, to highlight that, you know, we budget for what's in the year, and then we look to be very prudent, and we will shift the timing of projects if we think we can access grant funding to soften the burden on ratepayers. And we've been very successful in that regard, both over many years, but certainly last year and again this year. And by having that delay, that will see us having some substantial dollars carry over, but it has allowed us to capture full complementary funding for some major projects, which in my mind is a worthwhile reason for that delay. I don't know whether there's any comment from one of the GMs on that, or whether you'd like to expand on that further.
No, certainly, Mr. Mayor. We will provide the comprehensive wrap-up reconciliation of those at the year end with the carryovers and indicate those.
Thank you. Any other discussion to the report today, Councillor McGuinness?
Just a point, Mayor, probably not really a question, but I think it's always good to note, while we do the variance with our revised budget, I think it's always good to reflect on what the original budget was too. And for mine, the budget is a budget, and while it's not ridiculously out, it's I like comparing that figure, especially at the end of the year, to just see how we have gone compared to the revised budget. I'm not used to this revising budget time after time, Ollie.
Most certainly. One of the auditors actually, one of their checklists is to look at the original budget and compare it to the year end. That's one of the key aspects that they look at, because it's no point adopting a budget that's going to change significantly throughout the year. So you have to, the budget that you adopt at that time should be reflective of true as best as possible. So
could I just add to Councillor McGuinness's comment? I think absolutely, in terms of what you schedule in that, what you have intended for that budget and reconciliation against that, the clarification, understanding the clarification and the separation of what gets varied by conscious decision of carry forward or of opportunity within the year, or event based. Don't mention the disaster word. That will make you rethink what you have to account for and how you get. It's also important to see both sides of that equation to understand what makes those variations from what you originally budget for.
And man, I forgot to sort of point out on page 6 of 8 of the attachment, or page 69 of the report, you can see up the top line there, note 4, notes of the financial statements, so around materials and services. There's a line that says disaster event emergent works and CDO. That 408,000, the bulk of that actually relates to the additional costs that council has incurred as part of the COVID restrictions and enforcing some of those. So yeah, the bottom line would have been a lot better, but that's
so that's an example of an unbudgeted expense. So
we're still hanging out that we may be reimbursed, but
yeah. Okay, councillors, you just GM, would you please? Sorry, Councillor Swanborough, did you want to make another comment?
Mayor, I was just commenting to it. At the end of the year, it seems like our cash position has improved substantially from last year, and I noticed it's up to like 6 months now of operating expenditure, which is probably the upper limit of what's recommended by QTC. And I'm just make the comment that I hope that it's not going to increase in the coming year any further than what it is, and that if it is, we should be looking at performing some more work for ratepayers in order to keep that figure at a constant level, no more than that 6 months of operating expenditure.
Sorry, Councillor, it might be worth just actually, rather than looking at a headline number, as we've had discussion in workshop, to actually understand what the true reserve number is versus the accrual, the carry forward of grant funds that have been already provided to us that sit there as part of cash, so they can't be considered part of cash because they're designated for an amount. And there's also a significant amount there for entitlements for workforce, which also can't be considered as part of free cash. It's actually something that we're required to carry on behalf of our employees for their benefit. So I'm not sure whether the GM Sustainability can actually tell us what the free cash, inverted commas, for want of a better term,
yes, it's generally around the 18 million. And just to Councillor Swanborough's comment, you will note in the budget deliberations that will be forecasted to increase, and that's because there was $7 million that's part of the capital funding that we didn't actually undertake. So we're only in the 2021 budget, there was only $24 million of capital works that was planned to be undertaken, down from about 30 million, which was originally anticipated. So the additional $7 million, whilst it's not free cash, that's part of capital funding that should be earmarked for future works, not just retained earnings. So that $40 million, you take away the underspend in capital from 1920, that starts to get us back around to that 18, around the four month sort of mark.
So it certainly is worth having proper understanding that whilst there's a headline number, there are multiple components of it, and perhaps as we look to properly inform ourselves rather than mislead the community, we should always have a subset there to understand what's the true free cash as opposed to the carry forward of accruals for workforce and the carry forward of grant funds, which is really a timing matter, a phasing matter of funds being made available to us through other levels of government. And if I'm correct, some of that funding there has a 2-year window for its expenditure on those projects. So it will seem like it's sitting there for some time.
That's right, Mr. Mayor. And part of our, we'll certainly provide some additional training to councils around understanding those, splitting the differences between restricted and unrestricted cash. Yeah, there's also prepayments with rates that's associated as part of our cash balance. So, you know, that equates to around potentially $2 million at some point in time. And, you know, we can't go spending that because that needs to offset the payments and rates. So
it's certainly a topic for us in the future to provide better clarity so there's no confusion of what's really sitting there. Thank you. So could you please read the recommendation, GM?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that Council endorse the monthly financial report for June 2020.
Seek a mover, Councillor Chalk. Seconder, Councillor McConnell. Wishing to speak further? Anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We have no miscellaneous business under item 12 today, so I now seek a motion to move into closed meeting to deal with 4 confidential matters. Councillor West, second to Councillor McGuinness. Those in favour? Those against? Sorry, I didn't get a full head count. Those in favour? Those against? We've got 1 abstaining. Righto. So we just note Division 1 abstaining, which... Sorry? No, I chose for a division. I called for a division for transparency. So that's Mayor and Divisions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favour, and Division 1 abstaining. We now move, for those who are and would and somewhere around 11:15 to 11:20, but my estimates have been off before. So Ansley tell us when we've started recording? Thank you, councillors. And for the gallery, we return to open session, and we have 4 matters to conclude, and one minor note to add at the end of that. So we move to item 13.1. GM, please read the recommendation for the benefit of those not in the room.
Thank you, Mayor. For item 13.1, native title Selwyn Street Extension, that Council issue a notice under 24 KA of the Native Title Act 1993 relating to the dedication of a road reserve and construction of road within Lot 31 SP 113955.
I'm a mover. Councillor Enright, seconder. Councillor West, wishing to speak further, councillor?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is an appropriate action to take with respect to our traditional custodians, and also to allow this community building project to proceed.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That's and those against? I will note a division. It'd be nice to stay with us in the room a little longer, councillor, please. So again, can I just confirm those in favour? Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Item 13.2. Introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation for item 13.2 is that Council make application under Queensland Resilience and Risk Reduction Fund for the following projects: Disaster Management Communication Strategy, Queensland Emergency Risk Management Framework for the Scenic Rim, Regional Resilience Assessment and Prioritisation Study and Natural Hazard Event Effects on Community Connectivity, Duck Creek Road Planning and Design Project, USQ Scenic Rim Entrepreneurial Action Hub Program, Maloney Crossing Number 2, Urban Stormwater Hazard Risk Assessments, Upgrade of Urban Stormwater Drainage, and Upper Logan Road Culvert Upgrade. And 2, Council allocate applicable contributions as part of the existing 2020, 2021 and 2021-2022 program operational capital budgets, if successful.
Seeker mover. Councillor Chalk, seconded. Councillor McConnell, wishing to speak further? Anyone seeking leave to speak against? Not, we put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. We move to item 13.3.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 13.3 is that Council consent to the occupancy agreement request between Beachmont Area Progress Association and Binnaburra Lodge Limited, allowing Binnaburra Lodge Ltd to trade from the Beachmont Old School Headmaster's Cottage for an additional period of 6 months, based on the clauses stipulated within the lease agreement between Council and Beachmont Area Progress Association and Binnaburra Lodge Ltd, and Council to delegate authority to the Chief Executive Officer in accordance with Section 257 of the Local Government Act 2009 to consent to a further extension of occupancy agreement between Beachmont Area Progress Association and Binnaburra Lodge Ltd for an additional 6 months if deemed required.
Seeker mover. Councillor West, seconder. Councillor McGuinness, wishing to speak further, councillor?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say, look, the first 6 months have gone exceedingly well with this partnership. It's been a win-win for Binnaburra, but also for the community group, BAPA, and the community have really benefited as well. So it's good to see this being extended.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Not, we put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 13.4.
Thank you, Mayor. Recommendation for item 13.4 is that Council, pursuant to Section 257 of the Local Government Act 2009 Queensland, delegate to the Chief Executive Officer the power to take all steps necessary to resolve Council's interests in the Dangamballan Five Rivers People Federal Court proceedings QUD 331/2017 and the Yugarapal People Federal Court proceedings QUD 213/2017, subject to Council's consent in any final determination, order or agreement being obtained.
Thank you, councillors. I seek a mover. Councillor Swanborough, a seconder. Councillor McConnell, wishing to speak further. Anyone seeking leave to speak against? Put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We have one minor point to just to come back to as a point of clarification to a prior recommendation or a prior motion today where there was a typographical error in the wording. GM, could you please just clarify that for us?
Thank you, Mayor. Under the item 11.1, Council Grant and Funding Programs Policy and Procedure Review, item 4 of the recommendation, there was a typo there. It should have read that the policy number, pardon me, the procedure number should have been CC01.01PR.01 instead of, it was duplicated from the line above.
Councillors, that's just, I don't believe that alters the materiality of our approval. It's just making sure we have the transparency of that accuracy. Okay, thank you for that correction. Councillors, that brings me to a close of the items that I have before us today for the ordinary meeting, and I will now bring the meeting to a close and thank you for your participation.